It gives me, it's great to have all of the chatter. That lets me know that the first session was a great success, and I'm looking forward to many more great panels. But it gives me great pleasure now to introduce Dr. Atyia Martin, who is Boston's Chief Resiliency Officer and Racial Equity. Okay, thank you.
Those of you who heard me speak before, you know the routine. I'm short, so I got to bring this way down. Good morning, everyone. I love it. It is such a pleasure to be here with you all. I was told I have 8 minutes, so I am going to say a whole lot of things in the span of 8 minutes, so hang in there with me, okay? So first of all, for those who aren't familiar, the City of Boston received a grant from 100 Resilient Cities, which was pioneered by the Rockefeller Foundation. And the City of Boston is one of 22 cities in the United States and one of 100 around the world that have been selected to be part of 100 Resilient Cities. And for us in this city, under the mayor's leadership, who you will hear from shortly, we have focused on making sure that racial equity, social justice, and social cohesion is embedded within all aspects of resilience. Because what we know about what we need to do in our city and cities across this country is close the gaps that are in the way of our children and adults in this city from reaching their human potential. And the things that are in the way range, but at the root is really issues of racism. And we know that because when we look at the stats, when we look at the numbers, we can see the outcomes, the perverse outcomes on the other end. So the numbers are telling us that we have a problem. And so the challenge before us is, what are we going to do about it? Right? What are we going to do about it as individuals and organizations? That all of us have been infected as people and institutions with the ingredients that create the space for racism to happen. And you all have just heard how that process worked from the previous presenters. And so for us to acknowledge our humanity and the fact that that is a real challenge for us, all of us, and that we have to proactively work to address it. So what I want to share with you is the City of Boston's resilience strategy process. So in order for us to develop our resilience strategy, we have pulled together an amazing group of people across sectors to guide that process for us. And we've called that group the Boston Resilience Collaborative, and we have many of them here with us today. So for those who are shy, you're gonna have to get over it, because I'm gonna ask you to stand for those folks who've been involved in the City of Boston's Boston Resilience Collaborative. Can you stand, please? Thank you. And this has been a process that we have modeled the principles of racial equity and social justice in terms of how government does business, how we partner across sectors within communities in order to really focus on what are our biggest challenges and how do we move forward to address those challenges. And the people who stood up, among many others, have worked very hard and given up a lot of their time to help us get to where we are today, which is we have a list of initiatives, we have a list of goals and actions that we are going to leverage in order to help bring all of the city together in helping us to build our resilience by closing the gap across all of the different issue areas where the underpinnings are really about how do we advance racial equity. So for me in this role, what I want to share with you is it has been an incredible privilege and honor, and I'm using the word privilege on purpose because I borrowed that from Jack Connors. Right here, who we just had a conversation about what a privilege it is to be in a position where you're doing things that you're passionate about, doing things with other people who are passionate about the work, and really this very unique moment in time that we have. We have this window of time that is incredibly amazing where we have in Mayor Walsh, a mayor who is opening up the door in a way that it's never been open for the city to really have deep conversations, not for the sake of just talking, but for the sake of us getting to action, right? But we all have to get on the same page in order to get there. We have to have terminology and a common language in order to do that. We have to acknowledge the fact that racism is a real thing and not just a perception, that it is not just at the individual levels, which we've talked about this morning, but it lives very deeply in institutions because of our long history of policies and practices and what we've built on top of that long history of policies and practices. And so we are in this moment in time where our mayor, where there's a hunger across the city for us to do something. I think many of us recognize that there's something going on, and we don't always have the language, we don't always have the tools, but we know that there's something and we want to be a part of it. And so thank you to Mayor Walsh for creating the space for me to be in this position, for us to be having these types of conversations for the purposes of action, and for us to take this journey collaboratively within government, within community, within institutions across the city, because it is a shared challenge that we all have. So with that said, I think I have met my 8 minutes. I think I exceeded them. However, I'll just end with sharing a quote with you that I shared at a conference that I presented at a couple of weeks ago, which is an African proverb that many of you may have heard before, but I think it really brings home this work and how we need to do it. And that quote is, if we want to go fast, go alone. If we want to go far, go together. This is long game work. We have to collaborate on how we do this because it is across all people, across all institutions, and it's such a complicated issue that there is no option for us but to collaborate and figure out how we're going to do this work together. So thank you so much. We are very excited to have the wonderful Jack Connors come up and introduce Mayor Martin J. Walsh. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm the wonderful Jack Connors. Did I mention the humble Jack Connors as well? This is a real privilege to be here with you this morning. Beginning with Melissa's comments and listening to each and every one of these speakers, it's just extraordinary. It reminded me of that old Sesame Street jingle or whatever. Some of these things aren't like the other, and there'd be 4 carrots and a peanut. I'm the peanut. And you, Emil, gave, every one of the speakers has given us hope. But when you said that the human brain is flexible, I have a few friends that would challenge that notion. But it's really encouraging to hear from a scientific point of view. So there's hope even for some of my friends. That's really extraordinary. Just to share a personal conflict, maybe the earliest mild conflict that I ever remember. I was in the advertising business, and I remember, so maybe all ads kind of caught my attention, maybe even as a youngster, and I grew up in Roslindale in the city of Boston, and one day I got on what was called the MTA back then. Remember Charlie and the MTA? And there was a poster on the streetcar, that in the background there was a sandlot baseball game being sort of, the individuals being picked for each team. And in the foreground were 2 white kids and 1 African-American kid. And the white kids were captains, and one said to the other, and I'll never forget this, "What difference does it make? He can hit." And I think that one ad says how I feel. And it also speaks volumes about how I regard our mayor. Marty Walsh and I have we've really developed a new friendship. It's all happened since he became mayor, and I needed a mayor to help me with Camp Harborview. And it's just been amazing what he's done on behalf of our 900 kids that are out on an island called Long Island. One of the Boston Harbor Islands is just but one example of what he does. I have a theory about his life and his motivation. He's been through a lot. He's in recovery. He would say that he's a recovering alcoholic. I guess that's the best term for it. I'm very familiar with recovering alcoholism. He is a cancer survivor. And so my theory is this, that he's decided to dedicate his life to public service to help other people. It's all bonus time for him. And every day he sets about to help some folks. He's not interested in becoming a U.S. senator. He's not interested in becoming governor. He's not interested in becoming state auditor. He's interested in being the best mayor in the history of the city of Boston. And his interest is on the folks. His interest is about the people and the people that he serves every day. If you really want to understand how much he cares about all of us in the city of Boston, take a ride with him. Spend a day and a night. Go through a 16, 17-hour day or night with him and watch where he goes and watch what he does. And that will speak volumes about this man. So I'm honored to be a friend. I'm honored to introduce one of the finest men I've ever met in public life, Martin Walsh, Mayor of the City of Boston.
Thank you, Jack. And I just said to Jack, I don't know how I follow that or even live up to that. I want to thank Jack Connors. Those of you that don't know who Jack is, and many of you probably do, Jack, as he said, was in advertising. He's also somebody who a lot of people call for advice on how to work on things. And probably about 10 years ago or so, in the city of Boston, there was a real need for the inner city kids who didn't really have a safe place to go. And what Jack did, along with then Mayor Menino and another gentleman, John Fish from Suffolk Construction, they talked about creating a camp. And where can we build a camp? And what they did was they found one of the Boston Harbor Islands that happens to be owned by the city of Boston and said, let's build a camp on the island. And the staggering number of kids that were surveyed were saying that they have never been near or seen the ocean. Now, that might be understood if it were Midwest of this country, but most of the kids that were going to the camp were from Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, which the sea line, the ocean line goes right through Dorchester. And you're thinking, you know, literally 10, 15, 20 blocks from where they live, the kids never saw Camp Harborview. So Jack got people together to create this camp where they have it every single summer. And what it was, not simply just a camp, it's a camp where you see the kids, where they go in as campers, and then now over time, some of the campers have graduated to become junior counselors and counselors, and it's kind of a year-round program with wraparound services. So the kids that are there now and the adults that are there now, the adults are often the kids that were from the neighborhood that were counseling the same kids that were them basically 10 years before that. This summer, with a lot of what's happening in the country, the unrest between the police and young boys of color and young girls of color, Jack called me up and said, I have an idea. I said, what is it? How about we bring the police out one day to interact with the students out there? And I said, it's a great idea. And he called the commissioner, and we had, I don't know how many police officers out there. And what was interesting was we watched the police officers interact with the kids, but for us, for the, when I say it's the city, it was a learning experience, because not every single officer was interacted in the way that we would have liked. They were there and they were interacting, but we're saying, how do we take that opportunity for next summer and create a program where we're forcing our officers? Because as you know, when you have a conference, you have a core group of people that want to go to all the different meeting rooms and talk about what's going on, and then you have a bunch of other people that will go to the main hall and listen to the main speakers, and then you have a good percentage of people that will come with the intention of being involved, but they just don't go to the discussions. And that's what we're doing. We're looking, how do we create that? And that's what Jack has been able to do with Camp Harborview. Take it from just an opportunity to get young people a good, safe place to be in the summer, turning it into a learning experience for our police officers to go and learn, because we have the kids at the camp. So I want to thank Jack for all his help and all his involvement in our city, and thank you for that very kind introduction. So thank you, Jack. I think I have 8 minutes too, so I'll be fast. I also want to give a shout out. I don't know if he's introduced. I know he's here. I think he's here because Jack invited him. There's a friend of mine and a friend of a lot of people in this room. His name is Father John Ooney. He's the pastor of St. Cecilia's Parish in Dorchester, and he's a Catholic priest who fights every day for social justice. And he's here today, and I want to thank Father Ooney for being here today. Last week, Father Ooney was he's on the committee that's supporting a hospital in Haiti, St. Bonaventure's Hospital in Haiti, and I went to that, and I had a chance to see what Father Ooney does, not just here in the city, but also his impact felt beyond the borders of Boston, and the impact what's happening in Haiti. So I want to thank Father Ooney for not just that night, but for being here as well today. I want to thank Tim and Beyond Conflict for serving in our city's resiliency collaborative and being a great partner in our city, particularly around the work of race and equity. It's something that's important. I want to thank MIT for hosting us today. You heard Dr. Atyia Martin up here, and you also probably heard her in the panel earlier. She's doing some incredible work on citywide race dialogues and what's going on, and we're about to embark on the next phase of that discussion out into the community, and she's guiding us on a citywide resiliency plan and talking about how we're going to make our city stronger. You know, this conversation around race in Boston came up during my campaign for mayor. Joyce Lanahan was my chief of policies in the room here, and we went to an event one night, and I was asked a question about racism in Boston, and I was a state representative, and my answer was, the question was something to the effect of, how do you think racism in Boston is? And I said, well, you know, it's not as bad as it was. And that's a typical answer for somebody who's concerned about how do you have a very difficult conversation about race. The answer was not satisfactory to the woman. We went back and had a conversation in our policy about racism in Boston and about how to deal with race. And ultimately, the decision was we got to tackle it head on. We can't dance around it. We can't do the political thing around it. I can't be the mayor and say, yeah, well, we set up a couple policies and say we're going to work on it. We had to jump in with both feet, and that's what we're doing in the city of Boston. We're in this conversation along with a whole bunch of other things, which I'll outline in a second. So that's kind of where we became when we became the mayor 3 years ago, and continue to do that. I want to thank the international and historic leaders who participated in the two-day discussion here. I know that we have leaders from South Africa who were working to lead the ending of apartheid in South Africa. I want to thank you for that. We have leaders who helped advance to get women involved in the Northern Ireland peace process, and somebody whose family is born in County Galway, I want to thank you for that. We have current and former ambassadors, and we have students, and we have all kinds of people in this room. I want to thank you for sharing your experiences here over the next couple of days, because it's important that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to learn from what was discussed in the past. We know that from history. So I want to thank you for that. I'm excited to see all the partners here. I know a lot of you in the room. Myself, I've known you in different realms and different places we've come across. I want to thank you for being here. But this is important to have your voices heard, but not just your voices heard, to give voice to the people who don't think they have a voice today. And I know that that's something that's important, and that's what Beyond Conflict does all the time. A month ago, I spoke at the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. Those of you that aren't from Boston, that's our biggest business group in the city of Boston. And you know, all the big players are there. Everybody who owns something or builds something or works somewhere is in that room. The room does not quite look like this. The room is a very different room. It's a majority, a lot of men, and a majority white room. And in that speech, God bless you, in that speech, we spoke about the opportunity of economic growth in the city of Boston. And we talked about I talked about what we're doing in the city of Boston, but I said that in order to bring up, in Boston we have a great city right now. We have $6 billion worth of development happening in our city. We're in the third largest building boom in the history of our city. We have a AAA bond rating for 3 years in a row. It's the first time in the history of our city we've had that. We have businesses like General Electric moving to our city. We have companies from all over the world coming to our city. Our population is surging. We're building more housing than any other time in our city. We're doing some great, unbelievable things in our city, and I talked about that at the Chamber of Commerce. That's how I led the speech. So it makes everyone feel really good about where we are and where we're going as a city. But then I also talked about the challenges that are holding us back. I talked about one of our biggest challenges, income inequality. I talked about that. I talked about economists, and this is a room of people that understand this, economists have said and have explained this, that income inequality is slowing down the progress of growth in not just Boston, but in the country and in the world. I talked about that disparity leading to inequality and disparities in health, education, every aspect of life. And I also talked about racism and race in that meeting. I talked about disparities that are rooted in history and continues to be barriers of opportunities today in our city. As a city, we have to come to terms with the past. We have to deal with the past. When I had a chance to go to Northern Ireland, up to the Belfast and Derry, my first time, it was a great trip because I had a chance, this was only a few years ago, in 2008, I think it was, and I had a chance to walk around because I understood a little bit about the conflict, and I understood about the whole Republican and the Unionist thing, and I know the Irish history of Collins and de Valera in 1916 and 1931 and the 32 counties. I get all that. And when I went up to the north, I saw that the history was still deep-rooted in generation after generation, that there was conflicts going on with young people. They have no idea what the conflicts were. And they also don't understand the history, because the history of Ireland didn't start between Protestants and Catholics. It started with England and Ireland, and Protestants actually led the revolt against England many times in Ireland prior to 1916. So I started thinking about and talking about the history in Northern Ireland, and I started thinking, like, how does that compare to Boston? And in Boston, our issue is race. And in some cases, Northern Ireland, the issue is race. It might be religious racism, but it's that deep divide. And so we talked about this at the Chamber of Commerce, and we talked about saying that creating opportunities in city government is not the only way we can lift people up in the city of Boston. We have 18,000 people living in the city of Boston. We have 650,000 people, 18,000 working in the city of Boston for the city, 650,000 people living in the city of Boston. Half of those people are people of color, which means about 325,000 people are people of color. The income inequality is so divided that if we wanted to simply employ 18,000 people of people of color from the city of Boston, we still don't even hit a fraction of the 350,000 people that are out there. So I talked to the business community and put a challenge out there that I need you to help me step up and create opportunities and pathways into your businesses. I also spoke about our dialogues of race, talking to the businesses that we not only, same scenario, 650,000 people, we have the race dialogues going on. We have one office of resiliency. There's no way on earth that one office can go out and do the race dialogues in every single corner of every single neighborhood in our city. So we're challenging some of the business communities, not challenging them, asking them, and I think they're going to accept the offer, to have some of these dialogues inside their companies as well. Because how do we do this across the board? It can't just be government. It has to be the private sector. It has to be the nonprofit sector. It has to be all the different pieces that we're doing. So we're able to do that. Our goal is to deepen trust across communities. Our goal is to make sure that we find common ground to help our city. And if I apologize if anything that Dr. Martin has repeated I'm saying, but common ground so that we can truly become a more resilient city. We also, as individuals and organizations, we have to hold ourselves more accountable and in a higher standard to creating change. It's something that we have to do. We're doing it at City Hall, and every day we try to do it more and more every single day. We're creating a workforce that's diverse, inclusive, and representative of our neighborhood in City Hall. Now, there was a story in the paper, the Globe, not too long ago, that said that we're only 1% better than we were before I became mayor of the city of Boston. And that's true, we're only 1% better. But when you look at and you take the next dive into the numbers, 50% of the people that we've hired since I started as mayor of the city of Boston have been people of color. 40% of the teachers that we've hired in the Boston Public Schools since I've been mayor are teachers of color. And we're making those gains. We're not getting bogged down by people wanting to poke holes. We're moving forward in ways of doing that. We're making sure that we bring diversity to the ranks of our police department. In the first year of being mayor, we're able to appoint the first African-American chief in the history of the Boston Police Department to the role of chief of the Boston Police Department. The command staff is made up of 50% people of color, not 3 or 4 people of color, 50% people of color. And we also have a representation of women in that number, not in that number, in the command staff as well. We realize that in the rank and file officers, we have to get our numbers better to represent and I think Northern Ireland had the same issue with the police force, is how do you get equal representation so you have people on the police force? We have what's called a civil service exam in the city that we can't really go around the civil service. We have to take veterans preference in the city of Boston. So what we did, we instituted a program that was in Boston, the cadet program, that we're going to be hiring 75% of our new cadets, of about 40 plus young people, will be people of color, to be able to work them towards a pathway into the police department. We also realized that when we did this stuff, that it's not just simply doing it and saying it is the right way. People will question us. So we have what's called a city score and a dashboard in my office, and that dashboard tells all the metrics of the city of Boston, just about every single metric. And we created a diversity dashboard as one of those metrics, and then we put it online. So people can actually go in and dig in and see where we are as a city. And if you go into that diversity dashboard at some point, you'll see the demographic breakdown of the city of Boston. You'll see the breakdown of women in the city of Boston working for the city. You'll see a pay scale in there as well. And that story will tell you that we have work to do. There's no question about it. But the point of it is that story is out there, and we're not running away from the fact that we have work to do. And we're going to continue to do that work. Everything that we do in our city, we need to advance our city, but we also must be intentional about the equity and opportunity. And that's what we're working on. We have to make sure in our education, in our youth programs, in our mentoring programs, in our community police relationships, in our pipelines, and also looking at second chances for folks that need second chances. Jack was very nice in his introduction. I got a couple second chances. I graduated college at the age of 40 years old. I didn't graduate college at the age of 22 years old. Between the age of 22 and 40, there's a little bit of conflict resolution to go on there, I think, in my life. But we also have to make sure that we've got to make sure that all of our citizens get an opportunity to earn a living wage, be self-sufficient, help them break the cycle of poverty. That's our responsibility as a society here in Boston, in this country. We need to make sure we're supporting people in our communities as well as supporting our small businesses. But we also have unique challenges that that are not unique to Boston. These challenges that we face as a nation, and not unique as well, will happen all over the world. That's why this conference, for the next 2 days, the discussions that you're going to have, these are important conversations and discussions to have, because I don't have all the answers. Dr. Martin doesn't have all the answers. Joyce Linehan doesn't have all the answers. Jack Conner doesn't have all the answers. Father Uni has a lot of the answers. But we need to work together, because there are people in this room that have experienced things in different parts of this world that you're going to be able to come and talk to us about. And in Boston, a light is going to go off and say, we never thought of that. We'll think of different ways of being able to do things. The conversation about race and equity and inclusion is truly a global one. And we have to be willing to listen and learn from each other. And I think that that's what we're here for. I want to thank you. I hope that everyone gets a great experience out of this opportunity today. I want to thank you for allowing me to say a few words here today, and thank you very much.